I'm ready. So I'm gonna make sure that you guys let me know if you can't hear me. I tried to position the mic so that it doesn't matter where my head's pointing, but everything's a little different sometimes. Okay, so this is part of our series, Creating a Culture of Proposal Success. This is Proposal Writing 1. Just a couple quick plugs before we get started is we've got researchacademy.asu.edu is where you register for a lot of events like these and other things, where you can basically learn more about how to do research, not just at ASU, but in general. They have over all kinds of different things, budgeting, whatever. And then researchadmin.asu.edu is where our RAs live, but we also sometimes refer to them too, and faculty can also use this as a resource for all kinds of things, ranging from institutional information, like DUNS numbers for your proposals and things. Of course, our RAs help us out with a lot of that, but this information's on here. I can also tell you where to get help if you get stuck with anything related to proposal submission, or really anything to do with research administration in general. Our website, funding.asu.edu, is specifically for research development at ASU, and there you can search for funding, find resources, and get connected. We'll eventually be updating this, so it may not look exactly like this, but for now this is pretty much what our main page looks like, and there's a blog and some other stuff on there that we regularly update with opportunities. You can find out more about proposal support, which is what I'm here for. So I guess I forgot to mention, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Spratte. I'm a proposal manager in Faye Farmer's Research Development Group, which is a subset of Knowledge Enterprise Development. And our shop is basically geared towards helping the university increase funding. And we do that by helping proposals get submitted. We specifically work on high-dollar strategic proposals over $1 million a year. We also do competitive intelligence, events, limited submissions, all kinds of things. So let's get started. Here we've got the first rule of proposal writing, as Brad Pitt is going to remind us, is to always be compliant. And I can't emphasize that enough. Whatever I say here doesn't really matter if your sponsor or your funding agency or a corporation or whoever would be funding your research or your ideas or sometimes equipment or whatever asks you to do something a certain way. You always do what they ask or risk being thrown out, which is just too much work goes into that. Okay, so the second rule of proposal writing, and probably very equally important to the first, but not quite, is know your audience. What you're really talking about is who's going to be reading this. And you think about it with research, is it going to a federal agency or a nonprofit or a corporation? These are all very different audiences. In fact, it's one reason why a lot of time we at ASU split into ASU Foundation to submit those corporate or nonprofit proposals, and we deal more with the federal agencies in research development, but there's some crossover. So when you're looking at that, you want to consider the knowledge of your subject. So even at the PhD level, knowledge is very specialized. So you can't assume that everybody knows everything in your field. I run into this all the time, especially on these multidisciplinary proposals, where faculty won't always know what somebody's talking about in their section, even if they both have degrees in electrical engineering, because that's how much knowledge is in the world. This is a very important one, is think about someone's available time to read. People are only going to read what they have to make a decision. And that's especially true with proposals, more true with corporations and nonprofits. But even with federal agencies where you have program officers or reviewers that are either paid or doing it because they're passionate about it, they still have a limited time to read. You've got to make sure that you counter that in. And that brings me to the next point about their interest in your subject. Somebody at a nonprofit or corporation, it may have a strong interest in your subject, but that's secondary to whatever their real goal is, which is usually to solve a problem or a solution. And we have knowledge that can help them. So, and it's the same type of thing with the funding agencies. They may not have exact interest in every little aspect of your proposal. So one thing that I've seen more of in the last year is people will talk about their background, like the history or the literature review, but there's really just not space or time for that in proposals. Sometimes that might be important to making a point, but you have to figure out how to condense that and not get too much off on a tangent. So, and this goes to why should they care, and you have to think about what your goal is. What do you want them to think when they finish reading? So for most of us, if not all of us sitting here, is that we want them to fund the research. So that's what they should walk away with, is going, why should I be reading this? Why should I care? Well, because this project's really cool and it advances something that I care about. So we're going to go into explaining our idea. You're going to see up here that I left some things over in the boxes that seem like they don't have any relevance. I was going to update this slide yesterday, but I ran out of time. But LJ pointed out this is actually a great teaching moment, because we're going to figure out how to use graphics in our proposals and layout, which is another class in this section. So for now, imagine that there's a finger and a magnifying glass and everything, and that this looked better. But so speaking of getting to the point, you want to be direct and be concise. The average attention span is about 8 seconds, 20 minutes if you can capture people's interest. And this really doesn't change. It's still true in academic proposals. Human nature doesn't change with education levels. And so you just want to make sure that you're very specific and that you can get to there. When you're talking about evidence, what are you qualified to do, or why are you qualified to do what you said you're going to do? You can prove this in a lot of different ways: citations, publications, the way you construct something, the way you write with authority about it, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. Again, writing with your reader in mind. We talked about that on the first slide. So you're going to use language and references that are familiar to the reader. DARPA, for example, cares mostly about U.S. military applications, particularly as they apply to the warfare. They're not really interested in the public good, even if that is another consequence of something that you're working on. So you may like mention that in passing, but you wouldn't focus on that in your proposal. Also to this point, sometimes literature in one subfield or one field is just not very well liked by another subfield or field. The example that I can think of from my background is that, like, within political science, the comparative politics people don't really like the same literature as the international relations people, even if they're writing about the same thing. And there's been like long battles over this. So I wouldn't necessarily cite something from comparative politics if I know the person reading this, like the program officer, is an international relations guy. And there's other examples in all kinds of fields. That's just the one that I'm most familiar with. That said, your reviewers may also include people who have written about your topic. They'll often expect to be cited. We actually had a proposal that went through a review process last spring, and one of the reviewers pretty much was upset that we didn't cite her citation, or one of the publications she wrote. So we went back and added it. Now that reviewer wasn't on the panel. This was before the submission, but you can imagine that same scenario in a setting at a federal agency, or even just a review panel. Like an NSF, those people are selected from outside of NSF, and so you want to make sure that you are conscious of who you think might be on that review panel. This is an important one. Is when you're talking about bringing your reader along gently, you don't want to bore, intimidate, or alienate your reader by immediately inundating them with these scientific or technical details. They may be interested in those things eventually. Again, it depends on your audience, but everyone asks themselves, whether it's definitely subconsciously, but also sometimes consciously, why they should keep reading. And then last but not least, this is really important. You don't want to leave questions at the end of paragraphs. So don't have your reader going, well, what was this really about? I don't know what these people are doing by the time they get done. And that goes through every paragraph in the document, but especially in those first couple pages. And being clear is extremely important. I always say that clear writing indicates clear thinking. And that's why it's so important to look at this and say, you want to be understood, you're not trying to intimidate or show off. That goes back to our last point. So you're going to let your research record and your ideas flaunt your intelligence, not so much your words. And what we mean specifically by that is avoiding unfamiliar jargon unless it's something common to your field, or if you can convey a pretty complex idea in much more a simple economic way, that's fine. You want to replace convoluted polysyllable words with simpler, more approachable ones. What I just said was actually a joke, and we could have easily said replace long, complex words with short, easy to understand ones. So as a bonus, that technique also saves valuable space. Anyone who's worked on a long proposal in a team knows space is always at a premium. When you can shorten those complicated words or phrases and say something simpler, it's clear and you're doing it in less words. So I don't want to talk about techniques to do that because that's what Dana DeSoni is going to talk about in writing too. Just know that they're there. Next on this is sticking one idea or concept in the same sentence or paragraph. So my classic example of this is Immanuel Kant. If you've read anything by him, he's a very famous philosopher. He wrote about all sorts of different subjects, and he would try to resolve too many issues in philosophy and really the world in one paragraph, maybe two, maybe three. And so by the end of these paragraphs, you're so lost about what's going on. And I've seen this in other things too, where people try to resolve every problem within electrical engineering or a subfield of electrical engineering. You can't do that. Focus on whatever it is you're trying to convince people of, and then move on to the next idea. And so where I think a lot of this comes from when we are looking at people who are struggling with writing proposals, but really any sort of academic research, I don't think people are doing it because they're trying to be mean or trying to alienate people. I think they do it because of what Steven Pinker, whose book I highly endorse, except for the last chapter that was kind of lame. But the curse of knowledge is this term he has for it. And what he talks about is that we forget that the room is, or the world is so often a room full of cliques. That every country, every culture, every club has its own lingo. So when you use only the lingo spoken in your own club, you're alienating most of the world and you're limiting your audience. And so what you have to do is you have to imagine you're the reader and imagine that you don't know what you know. And of course, this is really hard, which is one reason why I think that having those review processes and putting people who aren't necessarily experts in your field but have some relationship to your field on your review teams is really important. And by doing this, you're letting yourself out of that clubhouse. And a lot of it, there's some really simple techniques to do this that we can quickly review here. One is explaining technical terms if needed. Sometimes we forget to, that something especially in academia, that comes as second nature to us, just needs like a positive phrase where it's comma, what I mean by that is blah, 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 comma. Don't invent or use unfamiliar abbreviations just to save a line or two. So clarity should not be the price of economy. If you have a recurring abbreviation and it really is like, 4 words, I've seen this before, it's fine to use that abbreviation, just make sure that you define it ahead of time and that people are very certain what's there. Using analogies to relate the unfamiliar to the familiar is very important. The classic example is in theoretical physics. There is really no way to explain complicated math to anybody because you're working so much on the frontier of math and what's possible there that it would be a really boring book if you just published it as that. So actually, what's really remarkable is theoretical physicists are some of the best writers in academia I know, despite having some of the most complicated material, because they're really good at using these analogies. And you think of all the popular people, Paul Davies here at ASU is really good at that, as is Sarah Walker. Many fields also borrow jargon and terms from other fields. Sometimes that's useful, a lot of times it's not. The common culprits here, like in business, writing, or sometimes within, well, really anything, but I see this especially in business. You'll see people that will just port words from business over into their writing, and so it just doesn't make sense. And they think they're speaking a lingo that makes sense to people, but it doesn't. And so just be careful of that. If it doesn't have a purpose or you're not sure if somebody else would understand it, don't use it. So we're going to move on to some other rules of proposal guidewriting or proposal writing that are more like guidelines. So writing in first person active. The reason we do this is not because I said so, it's not because your fourth grade teacher said so, it's because you're creating a bond with your reader. You want to remind reviewers why they are paying you, an intelligent, capable human being, to do research. And remember that they're paying you, they're not paying some abstract entity that's just going to manifest itself from the ether. They're not paying me, they're not paying ASU, they're paying you. So your goal, and this is part of what we're going to talk about, is persuading through ethos. And by using first person, you're doing that. So our examples in first person, active or I am pioneering technique X, we are pioneering technique X. Third person, which is what we see most often in journals, and there's a reason for that. It creates distance, it creates objectivity. It's useful in journals because you're keeping the emphasis on the subject, not the author. And the reason that you want to do that there is because, as we're going to talk about, you're trying to persuade through logos or through reason. The exception to this rule here, of course, going back to using the first person, is in NSF abstracts, the project summaries. You're actually required to use third person, so obviously that goes back to rule 1. You're still going to use third person there. There's a couple other things here that I want to talk about. Second person, people almost seem afraid to use in proposals, and that's not just in the university, which is odd because it's actually incredibly useful to appeal to your sponsor or customer if you're using you. You are, and that can be either the plural or the singular. And the goal there is persuading through pathos. We'll get to that again, and that's sympathy. You say you, you're going, oh, I understand your needs. We don't want to use the passive almost ever. Again, this is common in science journals, especially common with politicians who don't want to take credit for anything, good or bad, and lawyers for the same reasons. And as a rule, it just removes any sort of relation as a human being ever. And there's times and place for that, but proposals is not one of them. So this is just basic writing and basic good writing, but it's especially important in proposals is tying actions to outcomes. And I'm going to go through an example here, leave that up for a couple of seconds so you guys can read that, and then we'll go through and identify the parts about what we're talking about. So the first part is we will adapt. This is in the first person active, just like we talked about. That's a good thing. Spectral imaging techniques now used in biology and medicine. There's your evidence. It's been done before. And remember, we talked about that. Action, using different wavelengths of light to capture the details of faded ink and deteriorated parchment. So that's what you're actually doing. Here's the tie, which you could write that a whole bunch of ways, but that's how I chose to do it here. Allow archaeologists and historians to decode otherwise unreadable historical documents. There's your outcome. So again, to review, you're tying yourself and your evidence to the action and the outcome. And we'll get to another example of that at the end. Before we do, I want to talk about some persuasive writing techniques that are more specific. So this is something that those who have come before me started, and I think it's great material, so we're still going to talk about the contrast here, and that's which is which. So we have technical versus persuasive writing. You have functional utilitarian, journal articles, dry and descriptive, you're telling them what to do, that's technical. That can be also instruction manuals, all kinds of things, right? Persuasive writing is more what we think of as sales or marketing. I think that's why we shy away from it, because we don't want to think that that's what we're doing in academia, but unfortunately, that's what we have to do to get the funding. So that's why we're here. That's what we're talking about with proposals. It should be, and does come off as passionate, even argumentative. And what you're doing is you're telling them what you will do and why they need you to do it. That's the big difference. So we have these images here. We think of the difference. This would be a heart, as we think of it in a technical sense. And you probably have some labels, most likely in Greek or Latin. And then we have our hands with a little heart. And so just to emphasize, especially when we're talking about research proposals, there is always a balance between argument and prose, between authority and instruction, and appeals to emotion. So we're not going to be always over in this camp here any more than we're always over here. And that's really where the art of research proposals is kind of difficult, as we're trying to combine the two. Okay, so building on these concepts. Remember earlier I talked about ethos. So this comes from Aristotle, like 2,300 plus years ago, when he wrote about rhetoric for the first time. And he talked about character, credentials, expertise, and authority. And you have other authors that have come after him that have affirmed this. Robert Cialdini, who is an ASU, he's an emeritus now, social psychologist, wrote a book on influence. And he talked about the importance of authority and being liked in decision making. Pathos, you're talking about emotions. Again, it's well documented by people who come after Aristotle that emotions drive decision making, even in times when we think they may not, such as research proposals. Logos or reason, these are logic, which is where that word comes from. Facts, objectivity, reality, and what's interesting is studies show that this is actually the least important method in persuading other people. If you don't have these other two, reason alone is not going to work. That said, and this is especially true to research proposals, these things all have to work together. You have to make a passionate argument that's founded in reason while demonstrating your character or credentials. You can't just be all about your expertise or authority. That's actual logical fallacy argument for authority. You can't be all about your emotions. That would just be pictures of cute cats. And you can't be all about the reason. I had a point about that. Oh, it's on the next slide. Okay, so we think of ourselves, okay, we say, I'm an engineer, or I'm a biologist. I have to write dry, boring text. And then you say, well, you don't mess up the font there, that's for sure. You say that every technical sentence can be persuasive. And that's what we're really getting at here, and we're going to try to teach you. And of course, we can't teach all of that in this one session, but that's I will try to walk you a little bit through that here in a minute. And the key concepts going along with this might actually be out of order. I'm not sure. Let me move on for a second. Sorry, guys. Okay, so, okay, fine, I'm an engineer and biologist, but I don't want to write persuasively because it's too fluffy. I won't be taken seriously. And the reality is that writing persuasively guarantees that your text is going to be read, and you're also including those facts and evidence to support your argument. You're not just putting a bunch of fluff in, and we'll get to what we're actually talking about here in a minute. So, and writing persuasively is not about ignoring reason involving the purely emotional appeals. I was talking about the cat photos and things. Is otherwise we just sent as 15 pages of cat photos and cute kitten pictures. And our data management plans would be on storing and sharing cat photos on Facebook, and there'd be no point in this. So we know that that's not true. So let's go back here. Sorry, those got put out of order. So what we're talking about are the key concepts and looking at how we're going to construct a persuasive argument. So this is features, which are some aspect of your idea that can solve your customer's problem, or in this case, your research agency's problem, and often that's going to fulfill a requirement. So then we have advantages. So you want to remember that your reader always wants to know what's in it for them. And I actually find that most faculty are very good at pointing out advantages to the NSF. Where they're not quite so good is its benefits, which is why your customer or sponsor should care. And I don't think that people ignore these. I think that they just, or sometimes it's that curse of knowledge. It might be obvious to somebody, like, oh, if I do this one project, it might allow me to build a cell phone battery that lasts longer, but they don't want to say that because they think that's obvious to the review audience. But that's really important, because even if they know that, you're reminding them, oh yeah, this is why we're doing this. That's where that emotion comes in. So then we have differentiator and discriminator, which shows how you're different from the competition. What do you offer that nobody else does, and what can you do differently from nobody else. So when we're talking about benefits, we're talking about things like time, quality, these can all be benefits, and I think almost every benefit can come back to one of these three, and if not one of those. Though what we're really talking about with almost all benefits is money or human life. I think when we're doing any sort of research or working with any corporation or any agency, we're either interested in making something cost less or maybe cost nothing, or we're trying to improve people's lives. Okay, so we want to talk about everything having a benefit. So people might say, well, my research is too abstract or whatever, but it always is, and that benefit should always be quantifiable or qualifiable. Sometimes things are obvious. I bring up the engineering example where you've got better integrated power circuits, mean longer battery life, and better performing electronic components. That's the advantage, though. The benefit in that is that my smartphone will be faster, allowing me to do my work more quickly. Sometimes benefits are much further downstream or much grander or much outside the box. So like in science, we think of the subjects like theoretical math or theoretical physics. There may not be an obvious benefit right away. So I don't know if anybody has an example of what a benefit for those types of things might be that they would like to share. Okay.
Testing 5G internet. I think it's driven by a whole bunch of physics and electrical engineering at the forefront and math, right? That's a definite benefit.
Okay, great. I'm glad somebody had this. I was hoping we get parts of this interactive here. We'll get to that in a second. And then, does anybody else have anything online? And again, the question was, what sorts of less obvious benefits things like theoretical math or theoretical physics have?
Not a math major.
How you guys doing? I'm a postdoc in the chemistry department, not a math major, but I could see with power sources, we're using fuel cells and battery systems for electric vehicles, so maybe coming up with new algorithms with these new autonomous vehicles.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think that's related to what Faye said, and those are all great examples. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I appreciate everyone's input. So then, and then things like history. I know this is often people's least favorite subject in school. It's because they don't see the point. And it's one of my favorites, so I have to explain the point. And what I think about is learning from the past is the goal there is to improve the future. You're decreasing the risk of future wars, for example, and that would be one benefit of studying history. And the proof is that violence has actually declined over the course of human history, even though we'd like to think not, but they've actually looked at that and found that indeed it has. We have fewer wars and fewer murders and all kinds of things. So that's good. And a lot of that, I think, is because we understand that we made those mistakes in the past and we hurt people. So what do we think about art as a benefit? And I was lucky enough last time to have an artist. I don't remember where she was from. I have her email address on here, but she gave me all the answers to this slide. But I want to open up to the floor first, because again, this is something that we have a hard time thinking of what's the point in art. Because people are willing to pay millions of dollars for a painting. Obviously it has some purpose, but what would we talk about if we were writing a proposal that I'm going to make you an art piece? There's no wrong answers, just so you guys know. It's not a trick question.
There are some people. There are some people who think differently from those of us who are trained as scientists, and they may learn something more from, say, a play about climate change or an art piece that kind of relates past climate to present climate, or whatever it is. It might speak to people in ways that reading a nice article about climate change just wouldn't do it.
Absolutely, and that is even one of the things that she had on here. I will say right before I again open that question that my observations of it earlier had a more utilitarian purpose about preserving people's past and promoting religion. Religion is, of course, tied to successful hunting or plentiful crops. So modern art has been harder, but I think, as Dana pointed out, that's a really good example, especially if we expand it to plays and television and things. Does anybody else have any?
There's a couple online. Taylor Rayborn says, art helps us understand, relate to what it means to be human.
Great.
Janet Pinhorn says, can provide a snapshot of the cultural experience of any given time.
Okay, great. And a lot of that stuff does touch on most of what she had here. So, you know, she's got things like wellness, healing, being a really utilitarian purpose of art is art therapy, which has actually been proven to be pretty effective at helping people deal with traumas and things. So there's all kinds of things. I think you guys are getting the point here, which is great, which is looking at things and finding a benefit and making that benefit relate to people on a human level. And sometimes we get wrapped up in research and we're explaining things like integrated power management circuits, or we're explaining theoretical physics, and we don't stop to go, we think this is really cool, but there are other purposes for that. We've got one more online?
Yeah, there's one more. Zia shares a way to express what an artist feels about his or her environment.
Okay, great. So that was actually a lot more lively than last time. We only had one response, which is why I got this card at the end. So I'm thrilled that everybody came up with those. So we're going to return to some more concrete examples for understanding these concepts. When we're talking about features in this example, we're talking about, we have this unique technology for a quick dry asphalt. Okay, that's a little boring, but what is it? What's the point? Construction time reduces by 50%, and that means traffic's going to resume quickly. And I'm going to try to illustrate the difference between benefits and advantages, because I know that's tricky here. So if we think about construction time, if I'm driving down the road, I don't care about construction time. I do care about traffic, but why do I actually care about traffic? So if you're turning this proposal into city council that you have this technology for quick dry asphalt, and if only they would give you, let's say, $500,000 so you could help them save a bunch of money over time, they might listen to you if you walk in and say, well, your construction time can be reduced by 50%, and your traffic will resume quickly. But the question is why? Remember, the advantage is to the agency, but the ultimate benefit is, well, what does the agency really care about? Well, they care about construction time because time is money. So now you're reducing their labor costs. They care about traffic resuming quickly, not because city council directly cares about traffic. They probably don't. But they do care a lot if people complain about traffic. So, ergo, their citizen complaints are reduced. And I'm hoping that that's clear to everybody. I'm going to go over a more specifically academic research example, but you could imagine a scenario where somebody at ASU was proposing a technology for a quick dry asphalt. And so let's say that we are proposing this, and we have some differentiators in our proposal. We're going to talk about, well, our technology is patented, which means nobody else can use it, and then it's perfect for high traffic areas, which, of course, if we're pretty much anywhere in an urban core, that counts. And then coming back to benefits. Oh, I know I put a thing around that. Sorry, guys. So again, that's the most important. So we're really talking about, if I'm writing a proposal here, I want to make sure that I'm absolutely addressing these 2 points. Don't want to leave them out. Okay, so let's go into example 2, and this example is going to inform a lot of the rest of the presentation. So what we've got is drugs from chemicals synthesized from black mamba venom for treating Alzheimer's. That's what we're making. So that's our feature, that's what we have to offer. So what's the advantage to somebody who might be willing to fund our research is that this drug is significantly more effective and less expensive than what's on the market. And the benefits of that, because again, people with Alzheimer's don't really, they may care about cost and effectiveness, but what they're really interested in is feeling better. So that's where that emotional appeal comes in. So now we've got symptomatic relief and increased quality of life and lifespan for people who actually have the disease. And we can reduce worldwide costs of treating Alzheimer's by 50%. Well, that's great for the consumer, great for just about everybody involved. So let's say that what are our differentiators? Well, for this example, I just made something up. So we're going to have a multidisciplinary international team of leading experts that have access to the black mambas, which are snakes, if you didn't know. That's very important because we can't really do this without milking them for their venom. And then we've got this guy who I made up named Dr. Ramirez, who has demonstrated success doing this. Again, remember, we're still going to talk about benefits. So when we're crafting a benefits statement, and this would be something you should probably do in that first paragraph of your proposal, I think there's debate about how effective it is, whether or not to lead with that statement or to put it at the end of the last paragraph. I don't think that's particularly important. We always teach that you should lead with the benefits statement and that you should always say all that stuff in the first paragraph in that first sentence. But I think that the core, if we can get you just to finish that in the first paragraph, that's the important thing. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying lead with benefits. So how do we do that? We talk about the features, then we talk about our evidence, then we talk about a quantified value. And the reason that we talk about a quantified value is that there was this guy, Chris Sant, who did some study. He's big in the proposal world. That actually, when people quantified their value, they found that it was far more persuasive. And you see that all the time in advertising. Like on the side of the shampoo bottle, are you more likely to buy it when it says 33% more, or if it just says more, right? Or if the bottle was just 10 ounces this time, and last time it was 7 ounces, are you now saying, oh, hey, look, I'll buy the 10-ounce bottle? No, because you probably didn't look at the ounces the last time, but you will if it says 33% more. And yes, I'm well aware that 7 into 10 is not a 33% difference, but I haven't had enough coffee to do that kind of math. Sorry, guys. So benefit to customer is what we're ultimately getting at. That's what we're constructing here. So in our example, our features, the drugs from venom, and then we've got Dr. Ramirez's expectations, experiments. I can't even read right now, Kelly. And then reduce treatment costs by 50%. So remember, that's ultimately our quantified value there. So with that, we're going to have our ultimate benefit, which is a better treatment for Alzheimer's. So again, we're going to refer back to these things, and you can technically do this for any sort of problem you have if you want to just think about the ethos, pathos, and logos. I don't care if you write those things down. It would just be one technique to doing it. But in this case, we're going to think about Dr. Ramirez's experiments. Remember, we're proving his authority. By the way, he works at this Clodomiro Picado Research Institute, which is a real place. I know it's in Central America. I think it's in Costa Rica. And they do this kind of research. University of Pretoria, I just picked some place that was plausibly close to where black mambas live. And then we've got a multidisciplinary team. So the point is we're proving, well, not only do we have the authority, but by the way, geographically, we're in a place where this is actually reasonable. And that might be true for anyone. We just turned in a proposal where we needed to be reasonably close to a whole bunch of different places, but when we ultimately constructed it, we picked some places that were close to where the researchers were, so that became part of our ethos. So the pathos is, again, we're going to provide relief for those who are suffering from Alzheimer's, and people won't go bankrupt trying to take care of grandma. The reason behind this, and this is where the science comes in, is the neurotoxins in black mamba venom bind tightly to nerve cells, and then peptides in black mamba venom are already being used as painkillers. So that's what we're looking at. And remember, we're trying to bring all three of those together. So now we're going to actually try and do that by writing a benefit statement together. Now, I already did this because there just wouldn't be enough time otherwise, but we're going to go through it and see why each one is better than the previous. So first, we're starting off, remember we talked about first person active, that's good. And then we have the action here. So, but the problem with this is not that it's bad writing, it's that all we've said is that we've just told people we're going to do what they asked us to do. And let's say that hypothetically the solicitation was for, I'm trying to imagine, let's just say it was using venom in any animal you wanted to do something that benefits humanity. Okay, so all we really said is that's what we're going to do, but that's not very exciting. So I always say, if you're just going to tell them what you're going to do, you may as well not bother, because that's what they asked you to do. They would hope that you read the solicitation and that you know the basic requirements. You could turn a proposal like this, but it's not going to win. So if you add to it, we have our first person active. We've got our action, which was the same as the previous example. And we've got our benefit and outcome. Remember, we talked about that outcome, tying it to an outcome. We talked about benefits. Now we've added why we really care about this. We're not really that interested in neurotoxins. We might think black mambas are cool, but we're probably not interested enough into them to think that studying them for millions of dollars is a great idea. But what do we really care about? Oh, well, we can treat people who suffer from Alzheimer's disease. Well, that's fantastic. But may not quite get there. It's much better, it's worth submitting, but we want to go one better than that. So, getting closer still. Again, we have the first person active in this example, and we're building on this. We have our action, studying the neurotoxins, and then we've got our quantified benefits and outcomes. Now, as you guys see here, we've got 29.8 million people who suffer. Well, now we've quantified our suffering, as much as we can anyway. And we've talked about lowering the cost of treatment in developed countries. So we've now added that extra benefit. We've actually quantified those costs, because if I'm coming into this, I might think, okay, well, lots of people have Alzheimer's, but let's say it's only $50 million are being spent on this, and I'm paying you $5 million to do this research, and this doesn't seem like a good enough payoff. But if we say, oh, but it's really 160 billion down to 80 billion. So then we've made our evidence there. We've got the Dr. Ramirez at the Universidad Central del Caribe has already discovered that black mamba neurotoxins bind tightly to nerve cells, making them effective at destroying those nerve cells and causing neurogenic shock in snakebite victims. So that last part isn't related to Alzheimer's. It's basically saying, look, we know black mamba venom is extremely powerful, but let's see how we're going to use it in a positive way. So peptides in black mamba venom are already being used as analgesics as powerful and effective as morphine. Okay, so if somebody turned this into me, I would be thrilled. I think we can improve it just slightly, but Grandma approves, so that's good. She can get her better Alzheimer's treatment. And then this I actually had to split into 2 slides. So it's a little bit longer than the previous ones, but that goes to tell you that it's more important to spend time and space on a proposal constructing these benefits and this initial argument, or whatever you want to call it, those first few paragraphs. I wouldn't quite say abstract, because you would want to put this in whatever the intro to your technical narrative or that project narrative part of your proposal is. But as you can see here, this is still that same example. We haven't changed anything. There's not really any new information. We're just rewriting it. So we've got our quantified benefit. And I removed the $160 billion because I didn't think it was as relevant, because we're telling them $80 billion less. Even if it were $90 billion being spent, we still love saving $80 billion no matter who we are. So we can now treat, again, we've still quantified the suffering, and now we've still got that same evidence. We've changed it slightly. Rather than focusing on the fact that black mamba venom can kill people, which is probably not what we want to say in the middle of a proposal. But we do want to point out instead that the neurotoxins, because they bind so tightly to nerve cells, could be very effective at isolating, targeting, and destroying nerve cells in atrophied regions of the brain. Okay, so the second half of this is all supposed to be 1 paragraph. So, oh, and by the way, on this, we also added in that statement about they're already being used as analgesics as powerful and effective as morphine. I think that's important, because it's so hard to quantify suffering, but a lot of people know how effective morphine is. But of course, it's also a problem with addiction, so that's a good way of bringing all some other elements into here and increasing the persuasiveness and broadening the appeal of your statement. So again, first person acted is still there, because up until now, we've only said we could do this, and that we've got some evidence, but now we're going to partner there, and we tied the action. And then, by the way, we forgot to say in the previous example, oh, we're going to make synthetic versions of this. We're not just going to inject people with black mamba venom. That probably wouldn't work out too well. So that's that we're going to call our winner. And again, the differences between this one and the previous example are more so about leading with a benefit. And the reason we encourage that is because it's then people reading why they should care right away. You don't have to stop and go, oh, well, you're going to partner with this group and isolate this. Well, that's fine and well, but why are we going to do that? So, and there's a bunch of different ways to do this. You could write a sentence like we did in this version with a benefit following, and that would be perfectly respectable in most instances. What I was trying to show you is how you can improve on this. You know, I didn't write this in 5 minutes and then just say, oh, I'm giving a presentation. This is something I spent a few hours on. Okay, how can I make this better and better and better and better? So if you have extra time before submission time for your proposal, I always encourage people, work on those front pieces, work on the executive summaries, the project abstracts, any sort of thing that you actually think that people are going to spend their time reading about, because that's really where you're making your selling point. So that said, do you guys have any questions about anything I talked about here? Comments?
I think I said this last year.
Wait. Oh, sorry.
I really project very well.
But online.
Oh, I think I said this last year, but when you started out with the saving money, that might be good if you're applying for funding from maybe a pharmaceutical company or a health insurer or something like that. But if you're applying to the NIH, it would seem to me that starting with the people who suffer from Alzheimer's would get the pathos in more. But I think it depends on who your audience is.
Absolutely, and I think that's a point worth mentioning, because I was thinking in terms of money, probably because I was trained in industry originally, and that's always what people care about. But no, you're right. And I think ultimately, especially if you're looking at the fact that we already spent $160 billion, because that's actually a true statistic on Alzheimer's, clearly this is very important to people, right? That's a lot of money. So if we're already spending that kind of money to help people from it, quantifying the number of people suffering is probably going to be more effective in a lot of cases. And certainly for a nonprofit, you might not talk about the money right away either. So Dana has a great point about tailoring that message to your audience. So in this case, maybe the previous version that grandma liked would have been better for a different audience. Anything else?
Oh, well, there is a question online, but it is there a place we can access past workshops? And there is. It is on funding.asU.edu/research-forums/past-events. And I'll send, and that is all in the information, the email that goes out after with the recording. You should have access to all of that, but it's all covered there. And I will also include in there proposals that it sounds like online a lot of people are wanting to see some sample winning proposals and to see some sample not winning proposals and available comments. So I'm going to look into that and I'll follow up via email if that's possible. It sounds like that's not possible.
Yeah, Faye, you want to field that?
Yeah, we'll send out a note, but generally speaking, I think this plays right into what Tobin was saying, is that know your audience, right? So you're recommended to go to your mentor or colleagues to look at successful NSF proposals because your NSF proposal may look and feel different from others who have won in the past. Each review panel has a different priority. Each solicitation has a different priority, and we actually, so in the last presentation we talk about constructing your proposal outline so that it reflects the needs and desires and actual compliance expectations of the solicitation, and that changes by solicitation. and year to year. So what we do recommend is that you create a cohort or a group of people who can share persuasive writing techniques and ways to think about approaching your sponsor. There are also very generic recommendations on how to write NSF proposals and NIH proposals and NEH proposals, and those are all can be found online. We advocate best practices at these workshops. So I know that there has always been a desire to do a proposal library, and that comes up regularly. It's not necessarily sustainable, so we actually point people to your mentors or your peers and then online resources. Similarly, NIH has example text and example proposals available for you. And NIGMS, I think, has a really great library there. However, we can try and track down previous awardees if you want, if it's of a big enough kind and type.
Great. Just a comment from Jean Wilson was kind enough online to say some sponsors include abstracts from prior awards. Those are good to look through, and they're available on their website as another resource. Thanks, Jeannie.
He's absolutely right. And I will also say that prior abstract review was touched on in the first workshop of the series by Landscape, on the Landscape, Knowing Your Funding Landscape workshop. So understanding what those abstracts look like and touch on are huge.
Yeah, I would add to what Faye said about not all proposals being the same, that even if we could give you every previous winning proposal, it wouldn't necessarily be written to best practices anyway, because there's dozens of reasons why proposals win. And I've read some really terribly written proposals that have won, and it's not to indict the people who wrote them, it's just to say that that isn't what I would use to teach something. So if people were looking for techniques, you're better off just focusing on what your sponsor and what your audience is looking for. And that's what she's talking about with NGIMS. IMS. They actually tell you really specifically like how NIH expects certain things done, right? And there are certain cultural issues with each sponsor, it just depends. So that's, even if we could, I don't think it would be particularly valuable, because what we've done and gone and rewritten that have been winners, this was an example last spring, there were 2 proposals we were able to get a hold of through this network that kind of people were involved in. I'm not sure how ethical or unethical that was, I'm not going to go into that, but the bottom line was that those proposals weren't particularly well written, and they were kind of weird graphically, like I'm not really sure what they were trying to do, but they won because they had a good idea and a good plan, and they knew the people that were running the grant and all kinds of things. So, anything else? Any other questions? You can always email me if you have any questions about the content and the slides. My email address is just tobin.spratte, S-P-R-A-T-T-E, at asu.edu. You can talk to me after this. If you're online, I don't know. Did you give them my email address? Okay, I would appreciate that. Just because I know some of this material is hard to breeze through in an hour, and I don't want people to feel like they don't have support. And even if you could access the slides, there are a bunch of notes that I had that I talked about, because I don't like to put everything on the slide. So, by all means. Anything else? Oh, yes, of course. That's my last slide. I just want to make sure we went through questions real quick. We have the proposal development workshop, or proposal writing 2. Isn't that what it is?
Huh? Oh, it's on 7.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Is it on the 30th or the 7th?
No, I wrote it twice.
Okay, so it's for sure on November 7th.
But I'm doing the same one for the grad college on the 30th, in case you wanted
Oh, okay.
to come
That's the confusion, I guess. There is. All right.
Somehow you knew that.
So grad college has one on November 30th, but the continuation of this series, in which Dana talks about how to trim text when people are trying to look for space, and how to rewrite some of those things to be more clear and less jargony. So she'll get into all of that so that you too can write a clear, concise, persuasive proposal to your sponsor. All right.
Thank you.